Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Kayla and it's time to crack into a good book. So today's video is going to be another wrap-up, and this is books 16 through 23 that I read in October and books 6 through 7 that I read in November. So I decided to keep my Evil-a-thon books separate so I could just do like an entire review for those. I meant to film, edit, and post this earlier, but this week has just been super busy. But in good news, a paper where I did the analysis for just got accepted for publication, and I finally made some progress on these simulations for my third paper that have been kind of like taking weeks to finalize. So that's nice. Some like actual progress has been happening with grad school, so that's always good. But yeah, so I've just been super busy and not really feeling like trying to sit down and film stuff. So like always, we'll move our way from the lowest rated to the highest rated, and I have a bunch of 4-star books here today. So, overall, a pretty strong group of books, I think. So the first 3 books I'll talk about are actually part of a series, and this is the Bobaverse series by Dennis E. Taylor. So I actually borrowed these from a friend, and we shall go ahead and get started. So I rated all of these books 3.5 stars, and the first one is We Are Legion, We Are Bob, and again this is by Dennis E. Taylor. So I think these are like indie sci-fi books. So basically here, this is a sci-fi novel where our main character Bob has finally succeeded at selling his business, and then he dies. So then 100 years later he wakes up as basically an AI that's in control of a probe that's searching for habitable planets. But other countries are also launching probes too, so it's kind of like a race to find, locations where humanity can live. I thought this was generally enjoyable and pretty funny. I really liked this concept of this guy becoming an AI, and you definitely get a lot of fun sections as he tries to improve conditions for himself and just figure everything out. So I thought the pacing was decent, but sometimes it drags a bit, and I think we have a lot of really short chapters, and basically what ends up happening here is Bob clones himself a lot, so hence We Are Legion, We Are Bob. So each chapter tends to be only a few pages, and you follow different clones of Bob. And at times, I think this can make for a little bit uneven pacing, just because, some clones are more interesting than others, and I was a little bit more motivated by certain stories, but in general, it is good. So I really liked all of Bob's clones, and just they all end up having very different personalities, and it's each clone is kind of a different tweak, I guess, on particular personality traits, and in some cases some personality traits are more present than others, and it's just really interesting to see the variety of people or variety of characters you get, all based on a clone of one person. I did sometimes struggle to remember everybody and where they are and what they're trying to do, because there are quite a few clones that end up popping up, and it's pretty easy to keep obviously Bob and then the first gen clones kind of separate, because we get to know them a bit more, but after that point, the clones of the first gen clones kind of sometimes get a little bit fuzzy in my mind. I think there's a lot of really great space and planet exploration here. I definitely liked this aspect a lot. There's, a storyline that's kind of first contact at a planet, and I really liked seeing, a few different alien races, and, some Bobs get attacked and have to deal with, these other probes from other countries who are trying to find these planets. We also have Earth obviously becoming uninhabitable, so it's this race to find somewhere to go, and it definitely makes for a lot of tense moments with political strain and things like that. There's definitely a lot of really fun, nerdy references here to shows. We have some Star Trek references. One of them is Homer, and I can't remember if he's in this one or one of the later ones, but Simpsons. There's just a lot of really fun nerd humor that I think will be very appealing to a lot of people. We do have some actual science bits and coding type stuff, so we have more technical aspects here, but I thought that it's not particularly overwhelming, and I think would be pretty easy to understand even if you're not super familiar with coding or science. I think it's pretty well explained. But yeah, so overall this was really fun, so we'll jump right into the second book, which is For We Are Many. So this is also a 3.5 star book, and basically Bob and his clones have been exploring the galaxy for 40 years, and basically we have this nuclear winter on Earth happening, and radicals are trying to kill what's left of humanity. We also have an alien species that demolishes all others. So I thought this was another fun installment. Again, the Bobs all have different projects going on. Several of them are like cultivating potentially habitable planets. And there's actually an ocean planet that has kraken, so obviously I loved that part. Like, I got super excited. I was like, yes, I love this. We certainly have a lot of conflict here as things don't go particularly smoothly. The situation is getting more and more tense on Earth, and people are becoming desperate. Bob has kind of been involved in an alien species, and he's basically become a sky god, but he maybe has meddled too much. So there's a lot of like, I don't know, discussions about like fallout and was this really the right thing to do, things like that. This alien species that demolishes all others is certainly creepy and definitely like alarming. They are not nice aliens. We do have even more point of view Bobs here, and there was actually this chart in the back that kind of like lays out the line of genealogy so you can figure out like which particular Bobs are clones of others. We do have even more pop culture references here that are also very fun. Again, it's the short chapters, so like it is easy to keep reading, but sometimes you don't get to spend as much time following a particular storyline as I necessarily wanted. We do have some more funny moments here, but there's also a lot of like sad or more contemplative ones as well. And then finally, the last of this main trilogy is All These Worlds, and this is also a 3.5-star book. So this is obviously the conclusion of this main story, and we're dealing with this alien species. Basically, the final battle to save humanity and other alien species. Some Bobs aren't really as concerned with these others as they are with local matters. We have different factions within the Bobs themselves who are more interested in, dealing with the others versus not. So I thought that this was a very good conclusion to the series. I do still have some struggles here with the pacing at times and just remembering all the Bobs, but again, generally enjoyable. We have even more Bobs here, and unfortunately, there was no helpful genealogy tree in the back. There's a lot of themes here about like what it really means to be human, and we have other species that are not human, like there's some like meerkat species and others that are kind of like bat pigs, I think. And obviously we have our Bobs who are artificial intelligence now, and they all have feelings. So it's like, what does it really mean to be human? We get more like humor and geeky moments here, and we get to see the Bobs problem solve and develop new tech, which turned out to be super fun, and I just really enjoyed that. Again, we have more fun exploration of planets, and there's more like sciencey things that happen, and I think a lot of the Bobs kind of question how much they should really be involved with people and the planets. But yeah, overall, I think that this was a really solid sci-fi series. I would definitely recommend it. I think there's a 4th book out that I don't know. It's an Audible exclusive, I think, unfortunately. I feel pretty satisfied with where this ended up, and I'm not really sure, like, where that goes and, like, what it's really exploring. But, like, I would definitely be open to reading more books in this universe, as well as more books in different series from this author. So now we move to a lot of the 4 stars here. So the first 4-star book I'll talk about is Ninefox Gambit by Yoon Lee. This is a sci-fi book, and I've already read this with Lena from Sufficiently Advanced Lena. So we follow Cheris as she has to recapture this fortress in order to redeem herself to the Hexarchate after using unconventional methods to fight heretics. She ends up becoming allies with this undead and possibly mad general in order to do so. So this is definitely one of the more complex, confusing sci-fi books I've ever read, but it's really enjoyable. It's definitely more like military sci-fi, but I don't think it's overwhelmingly so. There's a lot of elements here that I really liked that involve like mathematics and this like calendar system, which is nothing I've ever seen before. So this is really unique, very different, and like I will say, the whole calendar-based system thing doesn't entirely make sense to me. Like, I'm not exactly sure about like some of the ramifications of, like going against this calendar and like what it really means. But like, I wasn't terribly bothered by that. I think like I kind of had a general picture of like, okay, this is what I think is happening, or like, I think this is close enough, and you can just kind of imagine possible ramifications of, some of these, of going against the calendar system, I guess. We get some obviously really interesting technology here, especially with this undead General Jadao. They basically like end up implanting this consciousness, I guess, of the dead general in our main character. It makes for some like really interesting dynamics here. But like I mentioned, so we have this different calendar system and there's different factions, and each of these factions have different strengths. So it's really interesting to explore, like, you know, certain families or whatever have different tendencies and stuff, and so you can kind of tell like which family, I guess, that somebody is from based on their actions. I think this was pretty quick to read overall. I was definitely interested in seeing where everything went. The best part by far is this relationship between Sheris, I don't know, and Jidao. You're definitely like questioning the entire time if Jidao is actually crazy and Sheris is trying to maintain her own individuality. We have a lot of great dialogue between them. Jidao is certainly like merciless, but also complex and like super fascinating. There's definitely a scene here that's like kind of like straight up horror in my mind. It was like super creepy and very dark. And I was like, oh my god, this is insane. Sheris, I think, is very strong and she wants to do her duty. So I thought both of these characters were really interesting, and you know, just the interactions with them was just definitely great. And like, my god, the ending was insane. So I definitely want to continue this series, and I mean, yeah, confusing but awesome. And Angela from Literature Science Alliance did an entire video kind of like breaking things down if like you're interested in this but like are a little intimidated. I think she does a really great job of kind of introducing you to the world and explaining things in a way that makes sense. So now I actually finished a series. So I read both Thunderhead and The Toll by Neal Shusterman. I gave both of these 4 stars. So obviously we'll start with Thunderhead first. This is the sequel to Scythe, which is kind of like this dystopian utopia where death has essentially been conquered, and we have these scythes who are tasked to kill people in order to like maintain the population. We have this Thunderhead, which is the perfect ruler, but it can't control the scythedom. So we have Rowan, who has basically become a vigilante, killing corrupt scythes, and we also have Citra, who challenges this new order of scythes, but not everyone wants to change. So I thought this was a great continuation, but I didn't fly through it as fast as I, read Scythe. I still think it's a really interesting, unique premise, and I liked getting to know the Thunderhead a bit more here. The ending was absolutely insane, and I'm so glad that I had the Toll to jump into right away, because having to wait to read that would have been a little bit torturous. My god, that was one of the more insane endings I feel like I've read recently. I think it's really interesting that this Thunderhead can't directly intervene with Scythe affairs, and it's, this obviously complicates things and forces people to kind of think creatively and think hard about what the Thunderhead can and cannot say, and sometimes silences are meaningful. I think there's a really interesting juxtaposition of Citra and Rowan changing things. Rowan being this vigilante, he's maybe not thinking things through very well. Citra, on the other hand, I thought this was great to see how she's embracing her new life as a scythe, and this is definitely, I thought her way was a much better way to change the scythedom, and, she's trying to be honorable and kind, which I definitely appreciated. She's very intelligent, and I really respect her. We also have this new character, Grayson, who, some of his sections were not quite as good, but I did like getting to see his journey and how his fate kind of connects with others. So there's definitely some really shocking moments here, and I just absolutely did not see coming at all. There's some very ominous villains, and we really get to see this rift that's been developing between the sides. So, I had definitely a good time with this. And so now we shall talk about The Toll, which I also rated 4 stars. So this one is interesting. Briefly, I guess some sides are gone and others are poised to take complete control. And basically the question is can anyone stop this person? So I went into this a little nervous because this definitely is a book that seems like people either have a love or a hate relationship with it. And I actually ended up really enjoying it. I think I went in with lower expectations, knowing that there's a lot of mixed opinions about this, and it worked out pretty well for me. So I will say, I think this was probably a bit too long, but I did really like where the story goes, and, it's not something I necessarily anticipated, but I think it's actually kind of awesome and a little bit surprising, and I don't know, I just definitely enjoyed it. Despite some sections being, not quite as interesting as others, I still actually read it in one sitting because I just needed to know what happened. There's a lot of characters here to follow, obviously, but including some new ones, like Jericho, who is this captain of this, like, salvager group type thing. I really liked them. We definitely have a lot of people questioning their ideals here, and, like, some are very dissatisfied with things. There's some tense moments where things are just absolutely insane. There's some really fun sections here that kind of are reflecting on the mythology of the Tone, the Toll, and the Thunder. So this was kind of humorous to think about because they're, like, written, you know, hundreds of, or I don't know how long the time period is, but, like, years later. It's entertaining to think about, like, how stories evolve over time and how interpretations of events can, or interpretations of certain accounts can vary widely. I continue to just generally enjoy the characters, obviously except for the villains, but they're still really well written, and, like, some characters I kind of, like, changed my mind on a little bit. Others I was like, yeah, no, this is definitely, like, a very well written villain where I can, like, be totally satisfied hating them so much. So yeah, you know, like, I'm glad that I read this and, like, finally finished the series, and I feel very satisfied with the series as a whole, and it's something I would definitely recommend if this premise sounds interesting to you. The next 4-star book I'll talk about is American Demon by Cam Harrison. So this is a return to the Hollows, which is, I mean, this is an urban fantasy series, and I think there were 13 books in the original series. There was, like, a prequel, and then obviously we're returning to the Hollows. So essentially, I'm gonna try to be a little bit vague so I don't spoil things, but in the, like, main series, forging new powers may have released something bound by the old. So we have zombies, murders, and a new demon in town. So Rachel, our main character, has to fight this new threat that could demand the sacrifice of everything she holds dear. So I really liked returning to this world. You know, I started reading the series, I think, when I was, like, 13, something like that. So it's been something that I've, like, you know, read for a while, and we have, like, vampires, werewolves, demons, pixies, elves, like, a whole bunch of various, like, supernatural creatures, and, you know, like, a lot of it does deal with the demons, but I think this is a really great world. You know, I think this actually did a really great job of recapping what happened previously without feeling too info dumpy. Like, a lot of the beginning stuff, there's kind of, like, mentions of, oh yeah, like, you know, like, reading, I was like, okay, yeah, I kind of, like, remember that happening. There's a lot of plot threads, I think, about the past and just moving forward. You know, like, it's okay for changes to happen, even though they can be hard and, you know, tough to get used to. I generally stayed interested in the story throughout the book. I really liked the new enemy that we get here. It's kind of this interesting being that's rather insidious. We have new foes and allies that we are dealing with. Some probably have some ulterior or hidden motives, but I'm very curious to see what happens here. It's fun to watch this. There's, like, one scene where Rachel is actually developing a new spell, and so it kind of, like, gets really technical, and I thought this was super awesome. You get to learn more about magic and souls, and it was just, like, really enjoyable for me. I will say some characters are not as involved here, like Ivy in particular, and I definitely miss them, but hopefully we'll see them more in the future. There's definitely, like, a lot of development, I guess, and discussion of the relationship between Rachel and Trent. I think Rachel does continue to do some self-sabotaging, but you know, in general, I'm very satisfied with the developments we get in this book, but I'm certainly interested to see where everything goes. So, I mean, obviously I would not jump in here. Like, I think you really should, if you're going to read this series, you should definitely start at the beginning, which I think is Dead Witch Walking. But, you know, it's been an urban fantasy series that I've really enjoyed, so I would definitely recommend it. The next 4-star book I'll talk about is Deathless Divide by Justina Ireland. So this is the sequel to Dread Nation, and this is kind of like this alternate history with zombies. So basically is like the Civil War happened and zombies came up. So yay! Jane and Catherine had been in this town, which kind of has fallen. So Jane wants to go west to find her mother, and on the way to this village, things don't go well, and this village turns out to not really be the safe haven that was promised. So she ends up going on a path of blood and violence. So I thought that this was definitely enjoyable, but I don't think it was quite as strong for me as Dread Nation. There were some slower parts, and it did feel a little bit long at times, but there's also some, like, kind of more shocking moments, so that kept things interesting. This is certainly a series that explores racism, white privilege, and, you know, like, there's a lot of discussion about, like, some characters are able to pass as white, and that can lead to certain advantages for them. I think this does a really great job of addressing these topics in a way that seems very natural and, you know, like, makes sense in this world. I still continue to love this premise of this alternate history with zombies. We have here this kind of reckless scientist who has some poor experimentation techniques. It kind of reminded me a bit of actual history in some aspects. I think the characters are still great. I really liked having Catherine's point of view here. We get to know and understand her a bit more, and, she kind of has some anxiety that she struggles with, so we get to, be in her head as she kind of manages this and, lives her life. She becomes a lot more sympathetic, I think, and it's interesting to juxtapose this with Jane's journey. I think there's some excellent female friendships here and representation. We have LGBTQ plus representation, characters of color. Obviously, we have a character who has an amputated limb. Jane and her revenge quest. It's definitely like how revenge can take over and change you from who you really are. I think Jane loses sight of herself a bit, but she has this really tough journey, and she's a tough woman though, so, I liked seeing her try to persevere and live on. So I think that this was definitely a solid sequel. I did prefer Dread Nation a bit more, but I think this is absolutely a series worth reading. So the last of the 4-star books I'll talk about is East of West, The Apocalypse, Year 1. This is by Jonathan Hickman. So this is a little bit heavy, but this is a bind-up of volumes 1 through 3 of this, and basically this is like an alternate history of America, and we have the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse roaming the earth and signaling the end times, and basically humanity's best hope for life is death. So that's like a super interesting premise. You're definitely thrown into here without much explanation, so I was definitely confused at times, and it's a little bit of a strange story, but ultimately I did really enjoy it. It's sort of like this sci-fi western type vibe. Obviously I love the horsemen, and I really want to find out more here. 3 of the horsemen, except for Death, end up being reborn, and I'm like, well, I want to know more about that situation and how this happened, and I want to know how the world got to this point, and there's a lot of unanswered questions that I will obviously need to keep reading to find out more. I really we have a couple of characters, the crow and the wolf, and they can actually turn into those animals, and I liked both of them a lot. They're kind of companions to Death, and pretty interesting people, and I want to learn more about them as well. It definitely has a lot of violence and gore and some kind of intense and horrifying scenes, so if you're a little squeamish, I don't know if this is necessarily the best graphic novel series to recommend. I ended up reading this all at once, which I'm not sure was the best idea, because at times I was like, okay, this is feeling a bit much, so maybe taking a break between them would have been a good idea, but such is life. I actually really liked this bind-up. There's some extra stuff that we get at the end that kind of goes through timelines of the different factions, and I think that really helped me put everything that I just read into context a bit more, because I was I read it and I was I don't really know what I just read, and then reading those extra bits, I was aha, okay, this makes a little bit more sense. So I definitely liked this bind-up. It's, a series that I definitely want to keep going with. I think the 3rd of these larger bind-ups is supposed to come out later this month. So I feel now that I bought this first bind-up, I want to buy the 2nd and 3rd years of the apocalypse. I had heard Kat from Brews and Reviews talk about this several times, and I was yeah, that sounds like something I would like, and I'm really intrigued by it, so I'm glad that I finally picked it up. If this premise sounds interesting to you, and again, if you're okay with these more gory, violent scenes, I would definitely recommend this. The last book I'll talk about is a 5-star book, and that's Raybearer by Jordan Ifueko. So this is a African-inspired YA fantasy. So we follow our main character, Tarisai, has been raised in isolation by an absent mother. And so the lady essentially sends her to the capital to compete to be chosen as one of the members of the Prince's Council. And so basically, this Council of 11 are joined together with the Ray. It's a really deep bond, so Tarisai is kind of really wanting this closeness with other people. But her mother has essentially compelled her to kill the prince when she wins his trust. So basically it's can she choose her own path, or is she doomed to follow this destiny that her mother has, decided for her? So I thought this was so lovely and magical. The setting is just so fantastic, and it definitely feels African-inspired. Though you do get a lot of other cultures and settings as well. I think there are some that are based on more Latin America, maybe France, maybe Korea. We got a lot of diversity and really great representation. I thought the plot was consistently engaging, and I just like could not stop reading. I just needed to know what happened. And I was supposed to be doing this as a buddy read with several people from the Space Sirens book club, and like I meant to send thoughts on Voxer as I read, and I kept being like, okay, well, I'll send it in a second. And then I was like, okay, one more chapter. And then suddenly I finished the book and I was like, well, shit, I didn't send any thoughts at all. So my bad, but this was awesome. I was definitely surprised at the direction it went. I think it really keeps you on your toes. The magic system is really cool, and I think there's a lot of like really unique individual powers, such as ones dealing with memory and like being able to identify weakness, which was super interesting. And just like also, so we have those like individual powers as well as this ray that joins our characters together, and I thought that was super interesting. We definitely have this found family aspect, and I thought this was wonderful, and I loved the closeness of everyone. And basically, one of the side effects, I guess, of the ray, not only are you like joined and can like be able to mentally communicate with each other, you also get immunity to different types of death, which is super cool. And like, I guess the downside of this though is that if you're too far apart from other members in the ray, you end up getting sick. So it's just really interesting. But I think this book explores family and not so great parents and just like unhealthy relationships in general. People are trying to take power and control others, and there's some plot points about like trying to erase cultural identity. Tarisai is determined to control her own destiny, and it's just like so thrilling to watch her path through the book and see her go from being this really lonely child to being an intelligent woman. She's still a teenager, and because this is YA, but she felt very mature for a teenager. I love how she wants to be just and really cares for everybody. She has a lot of love to share, I think, and she's very compassionate. The romance in this book is not insta-love, and I actually really believed in the romance that develops. It makes sense, it feels realistic, and I'm glad that it wasn't like the easy way out, I guess, in terms of relationships. So, again, some great representation here. I think this was just absolutely wonderful. It is definitely worth your time, and I really want to read book 2. So with that, those are the 10 books that I have to talk to you about today. Let me know in the comments if you've read any of these books or think you might pick them up. And for your question of the day, how do you feel when authors return to a world where, we've had a completed series and they're returning back to that, what happened with American Demon? So yeah, if I do have a Discord channel, and if you want to join that, the link is in the description below. I hope you're all having an excellent day and are reading something awesome. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to give a big thumbs up, as that would certainly help me out. But with that, I think I'm going to wrap it up here and see you in the next one.